So what we have here today is a situation where they want a garbage disposal and a dishwasher, which needs to go in this side of the kitchen. That's where they want the dishwasher, except obviously there was not a pre-installed disposal or dishwasher in here. So this project's challenge is what we do to make the accommodations. First considerations, of course, when installing a new dishwasher is where are you going to pick up the water supply from. And here are the water supply for the hot and cold faucet, and here I will most likely probably tap into this and use a T, probably a shark bite for this project. The second most important thing is for the dishwasher and the disposal alike is where are you going to pick up the power from. So I have a possible contender there where to pick up the power. Possibly over here too, but this is closer to where I need to be. And before digging into this and tapping in, the very first thing you have to think about is how much current can you pull off of this. First, after determining if you have power, access to power and access to water, the next thing is to make sure that your unit will even fit. Well, this guy here is 25 inches wide, no, 25 inches deep, 23 wide, and he is 33.5 tall. So here I have 24 deep. Got 30, so yeah, I have 31 wide there, so that should be more than enough room. And the main thing, will it fit under the counter? Which counters are generally 36 high to the top. So if I've got 33, then I am good, which it should be, because they're designed to go under counters. The thing I need to start doing here is making a compartment for the dishwasher. Everybody has their own way of doing things, of course, and one of the things I like to do is on these projects is I recycle all the hardware and the screws that are usable and the material if I can, and these cabinets were made out of some of that birchwood you can't really find anymore, so I might end up using some of this stuff to trim out the dishwasher when we get it installed. And so, you know, takes a little extra time, but sometimes you can save some extra money. We all know how much hardware costs, and also the more you recycle, the less you have to put in the landfill, so there's always that. Here's one of those decision-making processes of how you want to cut this out to make room. This particular situation, since I see this as a separate cabinet, I think I'm just going to remove this piece altogether, and then this is one cabinet over here, but I'll probably just cut him down to right here and cut this off here straight back and continue trimming it out after it's all said and done. So I'm in the process of taking this cabinet out here, and it's getting hung up because on the last time the linoleum was laid down, as you can see, it's just tight enough I can't seem to get over it. So in these kinds of situations, that's where I like to use one of these flush cut tools. So I can go right on there and trim that off, so I can slide this over the linoleum right here that's down against the old floor. So this goes all the way down to the bottom. Sometimes when I'm working these types of places, especially if there's little ones eating, I try not to use too many power tools because it kicks up a lot of dust. So keep that in mind when you're working with people. So if you're like me, and if you use a lot of saws and power tools, you're inevitably going to chop up your cords. There's no problem with going to the store and getting a new end and putting new ends on your new shorter cords. And I'm not above patching two separate cords together for these kinds of things. And of course, in an area like this where you don't want a 60-foot cord, we got a nice little 20-foot we can plug in somewhere, and so sometimes there's ways to salvage things that you mess up. Sometimes hand tools are really nice for things too. This is how I'm going to trim this out, and then after it's done, I'll sand it before I trim it out any further. So I wanted to see if I could pick up some power from here. So what I did to see if the wires were coming from underneath the cabinet is I used my stud finder, but used the deep scan. Whoops, start over again. Which says that there's power there. And then so all I'm going to do is just take my little flush cut tool and dig into the drywall just a little bit, but not all the way, because obviously I don't want to cut into the wires, so I'm just going to take my knife and cut the rest of this out. I was wrong, that was just a stud that was there. I thought it was telling me that there was electrical current there, but that's okay, because what I'll do is I'll run some fish tape straight up to the outlet, and then I'll run in some more wire down and come down here and run out this way. So you can see it goes straight down. So I've got an easy shot down the wall to run some wire down. Thing in regards to the garbage disposal, very first thing that needs to happen is the water needs to get shut off. So here's the hot water heater, and this will shut off the hot water. It's off right now. You can always tell when these things are on because they run in line with the water flow. That's how you know it's on or off. Now that's off. But I actually want to shut the main water supply off for this, so I don't have to drain the whole hot water tank. Under here is the crawl space, and there's been a lot of nice work done under here. Got a nice vapor barrier, some new valves installed. Here is the main, this is on city water. It's the main shut-off valve. So I'm just going to turn that puppy off. Sometimes when these valves are old, you try to turn them off and they start leaking right away. One easy solution to that is just to take a wrench, and tighten this nut up right here. Sometimes that'll do the trick if they're old. Now, when relieving water pressure to work on the sink, sometimes it's best to go to the lowest point of gravity and turn the water on that way, and that'll help drain everything fast so you don't have such a mess underneath the sink. So with the water shut off there, when I go and tap into the water lines here, I shouldn't have to have a big mess all over the place because the water's draining outside. With the water pressure disabled, what I'm going to do here next, before I install the garbage disposal, is I'm going to take this tool right here and I'm going to split these two, which is the hot water line, and this will be my water supply for the dishwasher. These are pretty handy. All you have to do is just wrap around and tighten, and that's how that's done. Or in the case like this, where you don't quite have enough room where your tool hits, you get these small guys and they allow you to get in these tight spots if you have to cut these open. Always at least a little bit of water in the pipes, so I always make sure I have at least a few little rags around to catch the little pressure built up in there. Everyone has their own theory about what are the best types of fittings to use here. You know, it's definitely okay to use solder and copper. That's one of the best ways to go. Sometimes it's hard to get back in here with the torch, and sometimes you can char the back area if you're not careful. PEX is great, you know, like in here I have enough room to use a PEX tool. Use a PEX tool like this and crimp the fitting. And on this particular one, I'm just going to use a slip-on shark bite. And my personal feeling on this is a lot of people say, no, never use these. Or I usually install these in places where I know they're easily accessible. So if there is trouble and you want to remove them, you can easily remove them. I generally don't put them behind sheetrock, even though generally there aren't any problems with these, but that's just my own personal way of looking at it. Now these ends are a little bit grimy, so I am going to take a piece of emery cloth and just clean them up here very slightly, just a little bit. Don't want to over scratch it because I want that seal on the shark bite to, you know, seal well. If you ever do have to undo one of these, this is how you do it. You take one of these little special tools. This one's a little bigger, but you take the one for the 1/2 inch, and all you have to do is press down and they pop right off. If I can do this one-handed, I'll demonstrate. Well, maybe I can't do it one-handed. But you can see what happens is it bites down on that little ring, pushes it in, and then that allows it to release. Thing of note, sometimes when you're doing this, like this where I had to press on it, these can be loose sometimes. If you're worried about losing your pipe, put a pair of vice grips on here and clamp it so this can't slide all the way down when you're working with this piece of copper line coming up through the floor. Yeah. So the dishwasher has a 3/8 supply line, so which to get its own shut-off valve, that's what we need. And coming on this one, I chose to go with the compression fitting on the copper, which will go like this, which will go into my shark bite T right there. They do have these valves that have the shark bite right on them, so you can go that way too, but they are very expensive. So I decided to go with the compression fitting. So you can see this puppy's pretty loose here. So before I start putting things back together, I'm going to tighten them up. If you're not familiar with these single valve units, here's what they look like. So you got your spray valve here, your hot and cold, and they all go into one little channel. And there's this little nut. See how that's loose? And that goes this little bracket, and there's this little nut right here. You got to tighten him to tighten the whole mechanism. Water is back on, and we don't have any leaks. And now the dishwasher has its own separate shutoff valve connected to the hot water supply line, and that's kind of important. If you connect it to the cold, you'll never get hot water in the dishwasher. So keep that in mind. For a new garbage disposal that hasn't been previously installed, all this has to be removed. And yes, you do got to remove the sink drain, because a new one has got to go in here, so this has to be removed. And the part that gets replaced is this, and one of the things you have to do to get this apart is take this snap ring off right here. And there's the little point opening right there, and you can get to it with a screwdriver and pull it off, and then this part is the new part that gets replaced. Your screwdriver, get under it, push this way, and it'll just pop right off. Now you can take it all apart now. And this part here is the part that gets reinserted in there. Order of business is to start taking stuff apart. I'm just going to undo this first clamp here with a pair of channel locks. Got it tight. I got to readjust them here. After you get it loosened, there you go. Now you can remove that. We'll have to remove this one too. So you notice this way I'm going counterclockwise. This was upside down, so it appears to spin the wrong way when you turn it, but it's just because of the angle it's at. Whoops. We got to undo all this stuff anyways, because we'll have to. Now I'm just slowly working all this out. I still got my rags here, because of course the P-trap will still have water in it. Generally it's good to have a bucket down here. Is this nut right here, which I'm going to use these bigger pair of channel locks, and swing this in a clockwise direction. Maybe I even can do this one-handed, maybe. Or maybe not. Okay, there we go. It's starting to loosen now. And after it loosens, you just pull it off. So, damn near half an hour later, as you can see, that nut's not very far yet. I was trying to save this piece, but the collar was put on with some pretty heavy-duty glue, which isn't not allowing it to slip out. So I was putting channel locks this way to go one way, and the channel locks, bigger ones, to go the opposite way to loosen it up. Sometimes these collars, sometimes they really get rusted on there, so there's one of three options. Get a second hand or another person's hand to hold on to one of the pair of the channel locks. Sometimes you can go in with a torch and heat it up to break it loose. And if in the event they're really, really rusted, you might actually have to take a hacksaw or a grinder and literally cut the nuts so it can come off, which I've had to do before. This one is slipping off now, but it was definitely on there tight. Those pieces out of there, we can start putting in the new piece. And what I'm going to do is, for a gasket, I'm going to use some plumber's putty. And if there's any corrosion on there, make sure you take your cleaner or whatever and clean out all the rust or corrosion that might be there. To make a gasket, you take a little ball of it and you just turn it into a big long worm. This stuff got a little cold. I'm worried it's almost wrecked, but I'm going to work it into a little gasket and then apply it around the base. So just work your little worm in between your hands until it gets long enough. Like this is almost there, so I'll keep rolling them out. When he's finally long enough, let's put them together and just sort of nudge them in there. This has nothing to do with any kind of perfection. You're just getting the putty in there. Because once you tighten your piece, it'll squeeze it all out everywhere. Okay, now I'm going to go underneath. I'm going to reapply the pieces and start tightening them up. There's little gasket that, I hate that light, gasket that goes up. And then after the gasket goes up, this piece goes on next. And remember, it's got to go on this way because the screws go underneath there. Alright, so it's going to tighten up like that. So make sure that goes on. So I don't know if there's really a super easy way to get all that back in there. I guess what I did here is just unscrew these screws as far as they could go so I could push this up as high as I can. And then with 2 hands get that ring in and try to squeeze that ring back in while holding all this up and using your other hand to try to pry the ring into the groove. Other than that, get another pair of hands or your good buddy or your girlfriend or whatever to hold on to part of it. That's an idea. Before you tighten it, just make sure you get your piece centered in the hole to where you like it before you clamp it down. The way I deal with this stuff is I just take it and I just kind of knife it over the edge and then roll it back. Guess I don't usually don't do this one-handed, but that's kind of how I deal with the excess. And just keep doing that until you get as much as you need off. And sometimes if I want to just get the last little bit, I'll just take a fingernail or something gentle like that, and I'll use that fingernail to get the very last little bit off that's showing. And then you can clean the rest off after you got the water back on. That in there we can actually put the unit in itself. But first, this is really important. If you've got a dishwasher, it's going to go into this inlet and you have to punch that out. So remember to punch that out. Because if you don't, the drain water from the dishwasher has nowhere to go and it'll back up in the drain water and then it'll clog the whole thing and then it'll wreck it and you'll have to buy a new dishwasher. So remember that part's important. And an easy enough way to do that, I guess while we're talking about it, is to set this on something soft like a rag and then take your screwdriver and then your hammer and just punch it out. And when the plastic nubbin falls inside, remember to fish it out of there. That doesn't need to be in there when you install it. Alright, so here we go. So I'll try to point this out, that this groove right here slips up over. I can't. This is a struggle here for one-handed. See, so that's got to slip up over. That little groove in there's got to slip up over, and there's 3 of them, and they slip up these channels. And then once you get it in there, you can take a screwdriver or something, and these are for tightening and loosening. You can see here how I'm tightening it with a screwdriver. And you can use a hammer to tap on it gently too, but generally just need a little something like this to pry it tight. It's got a rubber gasket in there to seal it up. Okay, there, now we're at the point. You put this back. If you ever have to replace the garbage disposal, everything's already set up. The first things when putting this back together is remember there's some components that come with it. And before you put this first piece on, remember to put the rubber gasket in there. That'll save you lots of trouble down the road. Now, you can go from straight out here over to the P-trap and the other sink drain, but they just kind of recommend each. The disposal and this side have their separate P-trap, but you can go straight over if you want to. It's not that big of a deal, but it's recommended for 2 traps. When you're doing these, putting this stuff back together, things have to be adjusted right, so you gotta cut things to fit. You can use hacksaw for this. I'm using one of these guys to cut these. One of these dudes right here. But hacksaw works just fine too. Just cut things where you need to cut them. I put all this stuff back together. When putting in old things that are still good, I like to clean them out thoroughly first, which I will after I get this fitted. The other thing is when these little gaskets here, make sure the crown is going towards the direction you're screwing into, because the screw compresses the gasket in there like so. That's how the seal is made. So remember, that's how the little gasket piece goes. This workout, I bought an extension piece. It's got this flat top, and those are meant for butting up there. And they have a little flat gasket, looks like that goes on there. And I'm using the original metal piece because my little plastic nubbins won't fit on there. I had gotten this adjustable extension piece to go on there, but as you can see, it's supposed to go on there, but it just won't. No matter what I do, I can't get that screwed on there. Anyways, had an extra piece from my junk bin that I put the length, but that's how I'm making the extension there. Now these don't really need to be super duper tight, mainly just hand tight to start with. Just tighten them up with your hand as good as you can. And then you can gently tighten them up with a pair of channel locks later if there's still a little bit of leakage, but they don't have to be super duper tight. That's not the point. The point is just be nice and snug. Now as you can see, my P-trap is much lower now because we got the garbage disposal and the P-trap over here, so everything's a lot lower, the outlets. So that's why I bought one of these nifty extension pieces right here. This will allow me to go from, get the camera back in there a little better, like there, down onto there. And these are cool because you can offset them a little bit too if things don't line up quite right. So that's how I'm going to make all that work. And before I hook all this up, I'm going to clean this out. So we got this far. Kind of what everything looks like now. Seem to have all the leaks taken care of. I just want to mention that instead of, let's see if I can get in here a little better, sorry about that. Trying to show this piece here. So these things they're pretty cool because you can extend them or bend them, but with this trap piece, this piece here was a little tough getting the leaks to stop. I don't think I'll do this next time. I think what I would do is I got some pieces laid out on the floor here. Pardon the trap that goes there has these special ends on them, and you can see how they go right into the crevice of there. I'd keep that piece, put it over, and then take a piece like this and essentially cut this guy where it needs to go. So if he was cut, attach him onto there, and then use one of these special elbows. You know, cut the piece right about here or so, tie the elbow on there, and then take the remainder of this piece, stick them in there, and then the other end would go into the outlet. That's the way I would set that up next time. Just because this piece was a little bit funky. So I'm just kind of reminding myself also. Alright, so this little piece I was worried about did not hold up, so I'm just going to get that dumb thing out of there and not use those anymore. This piece. It turns out these things are the worst. If you ever get an opportunity to use these, don't. They're garbage. And plus I found out that they're not compliant with code either, so lesson learned here. So, for future reference, I had to, instead of trying to come out of here, I put an elbow right here to go back into my pipe, which goes into a threaded there, but that piece that I had to make the adjustment, so gonna undo this here really quick. This piece back, this isn't an elbow, this is the piece that goes on the trap. I cut it back to make room and then put that in there, so that's how that's going to look now, which will avoid any further leaks.